Hey art nerds, today we are taking a look at the Master's Touch watercolor kit that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. I got it at 50% off, so I paid about $7.50 for it. And this is the piece that we're going to be making today. It's an illustration of some lemons, and I feel like this is a good example of what these paints can do. So the materials we're using today are the Hobby Lobby Master's Touch watercolor paper, the 12 color watercolor set, so it has 12 tubes in it, a mini palette, 3 brushes, a pencil, an eraser, and a sharpener in this small wooden case, and a cup of clean water. So I want to start by doing an illustration using the pencil that came with the set, which is a HB pencil, to sketch my illustration out onto this paper. So the materials I see myself using are the HB pencil, the white vinyl eraser, and the small plastic sharpener that was included in this set. And that's a really cheap little sharpener. You can usually get those in just any kind of children's art kit. So for the time being, I'm going to shut my little kit and just focus on sketching. So I'm not a huge fan of the texture on the Hobby Lobby watercolor paper. It has this unusual kind of linen crosshatch texture that I'm just not really used to. It's not the worst watercolor paper I've reviewed, but it's certainly not my favorite. I do feel like it's a good match with the Master's Touch watercolors. If you guys are interested in learning more about these watercolors, you guys can check out my unbox and swatch video. It'll be linked in the cards as well as down in the description below. So using the pencil, I decided that the HB is a little soft for me for watercolor. Usually I would go with an H lead or I would use a colored lead. And the eraser that came in this kit is okay. There's no real smearing. It actually erased. It's a little bit dusty, but it's not the worst eraser. And I'm glad that they chose to include a white vinyl eraser since it's my preference. And the paper, as I said, is not my preferred texture, but I wanted to use the Master's Touch watercolor paper with the Master's Touch kit. So for this review, I pretty much just wanted to use materials included in this kit, although I did grab a small ceramic plate to use as a palette because the included plastic palette is not really large enough for me to do what I need to do. And I went ahead and I selected the base colors that I want to use. Now there isn't a cool blue in this set, there's just an ultramarine blue, so I'm using that in lieu of a cool blue. But we're also using the cool yellow, the warm and cool greens, and black. And as I mentioned in the unbox and swatch video, all of the brushes in this set are really too small. You want to use the largest brush you're comfortable using, otherwise your colors are going to get kind of scrubby and muddy. And the watercolors and these brushes, they just really don't handle like I think of watercolor paints. And the Dextrin makes my hands really sticky, which is just kind of gross. So I've mixed the ultramarine blue with the black in order to get a nice dark blue for our background color. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to develop a lot of contrast in color using what we have. The Dextrin in these paints that's used as the binder in lieu of gum arabic or honey is dark, and it's fairly brown, and it definitely makes the colors seem more muddy than they would be. So when I'm working with watercolor with two small brushes, it definitely has kind of a paint by numbers feel. You can't really rely on the brush to do the work, and you have to really rely on just carefully and methodically painting things in. These brushes don't have a lot of flex, and because they're synthetic, they don't really hold the water or the paint that well, and they're very prone to dripping. So you guys see I keep returning to my palette to pick up more paint because these brushes just don't hold a lot of it. They're also very cheaply made. The metal ferrule is really cheap, and the handle itself is cheap. There's no lacquer, it's just painted blue, so it's not as smooth in the hand as watercolor brushes would normally be. I also found that the colors in this set are it's very difficult to build up saturation, to build up color, and to build up contrast, which is another reason why I don't feel like these really handle like watercolors. I know a lot of people associate watercolor with pastel, but quality watercolors are capable of a large gamut of saturation and intensity, from very pastel to very saturated. And these watercolors are just not capable of that. They have too many optical brighteners, they have too many fillers, and they don't have enough pigment to really be able to deliver on that. And you're really not going to be able to get the sort of wet into wet techniques you might want with watercolor, because these contain so much binder, so much dextrin, that the pigment doesn't flow the way you would expect watercolor pigments to flow. So I feel like any artist who's familiar with watercolor and comfortable with watercolor may be frustrated with this set. This would definitely not be a good set for someone who's already fairly comfortable with watercolor. So I've mixed a little bit of the cooler red with the purple in order to get a nice sort of red violet, and I'm using that to paint the buds on the lemon blossoms. So for something like this, a little bit of wet into wet blending, where I paint one set of leaves and then immediately paint the next set and the colors kind of blend into each other, would be very welcome because it would add a lot of liveliness. But as I mentioned earlier, these paints don't really lend themselves for wet into wet blends. I have a feeling I could have gone at it with a water spritzer and it still wouldn't have given me any movement. So if you're painting along at home, if you're studying along at home, if you're watching tutorials and using these paints, you may not be capable of executing the techniques demonstrated in the videos with these paints. They just can't deliver that sort of performance. The colors are fairly opaque. They feel dead. There's no liveliness or sedimentation that you get with nicer grade paints. I'm also having difficulty developing color, contrast, and depth, which are all key elements for how I pursue watercolor illustration. Everything is just tonally very much the same. With a very little amount of paint and a lot of water, you're not really going to get much of anything, let alone a very light wash. And even if you could get that light wash, by the time you finish applying it with this scrubby little brush, it would have already begun to dry. And as I'm layering the paints, I notice that the brushes are scrubbing up my prior layers, which is really very frustrating. I made it a point to use the materials included in the kit and not augment or replace them with my own materials, because when it comes to kits, I want to review what's actually in the kit. And I'm just really disappointed by the performance. Now, some of my friends over on my Discord server, the Paint Box, said that they do enjoy certain Master's Touch products. Some are better than others. And in the comments on the Hobby Lobby gift card guide and on the unbox and swatch video for this product, there are certain Master's Touch products that some people like. I've heard that the half pan sets are actually much better than this. So your mileage may vary, and you may want to watch other reviews before you make the investment. And I know $7 is really not a lot of investment. It's not a lot of money to spend, but $7 to get a product you hate, a product that fights you, or a product that's going to disappoint you is $7 wasted. So keep that in mind. So for the lemons in the background, I mixed some of the cool yellow with our ultramarine blue to make kind of an olive green color. And I applied that on top of the lemons. And it just has this very dead kind of feel. Like I said, it's a lot like doing a paint by numbers. Once my lemons had a bit of a chance to dry, I went ahead and I went over our cool yellow with the warmer yellow in the set. And I'm doing this just because A, the reference that I was using of lemons does show that some of the foreground lemons that are getting more sunlight have a warmer, slightly darker shade to them. You could even go into the oranges, and that's going to bring everything to the forefront, make it seem closer, because colors that are warmer appear closer to the viewer and colors that are cooler appear further from the viewer. But also it just adds a little brightness and liveliness to this piece, and it really needs it. These paints are really just mediocre. I feel like Reeves are better. And if you're interested in learning more about very affordable watercolors, I have a lot of those kind of reviews here on this channel, including a Reeves review that you guys can check out. I would recommend, though, if you're really interested in watercolor, skip this set, save your money, and get the Daniel Smith Essential 6 set. You're only going to get 6 tubes of paint, but they're infinitely more usable and infinitely more mixable, and you're going to be much happier with the results. And I have a video on the Essential 6 set here on this channel as well. So you guys will be able to find everything I've mentioned in this video down in the description below. So I tried to use the included titanium white to add highlights to the lemons, and now I'm trying to use the black to add an outline and just kind of clean it up, maybe make it more graphic. These really handle more like gouache. They're not pigmented enough, so you end up working with a thicker mix than you might want in order to get the saturation that you're looking for. You can't see any sort of pigmentation or sedimentation. The colors are all very dead. And there's so much optical brighteners that everything's kind of opaque. So instead of getting kind of those scintillating layers of color, instead you get very flat layers of color like you might get with gouache. I really, really don't like the watercolors in this set. I was very disappointed by this set, and I really hope this review will help you guys avoid this set. Now, I don't know if the tube paints use the same pigments, use the same process as the open stock Masters Touch tube paints. If you know whether or not this is the case, let me know down in the comments. I'm happy to hear from you guys. And I know that Masters Touch does have some hits. Some people like their open stock watercolor brushes or their watercolor brushes sold as brush kits. Some people like the paper and some people like the half pans. So my opinions are just based on my own preferences and my experiences, and you may find that you actually enjoy this kit. But I will say, based on my years of experience painting watercolor comics, I just cannot recommend this kit, and I really dislike it. So here's our finished field test. The paper texture for the Master's Touch watercolor paper didn't really bother me. I actually found it quite helpful with these watercolors. It actually kind of held on to the watercolors and prevented them from being entirely scraped up off the paper. I think the nicest thing in this kit is probably the white vinyl eraser, because even the wooden box has started to chip and this thing is brand new. Now, even though I dislike this kit, I'm going to donate it to the library because I know that there's somebody who might be able to put it to good use and be able to use it to explore art and to learn more about watercolors. So I hope they use it in good health. But in general, if you are at Hobby Lobby and you're thinking about buying these watercolors, I highly recommend you skip them, save your money, and maybe even consider going elsewhere. Hobby Lobby is increasingly moving to only offering Master's Touch, their house brand line. So you can see, big old thumbs down. They're moving increasingly towards only offering the Master's Touch line and getting rid of national brands. So it's becoming harder to justify a trip to Hobby Lobby because 50-50 chance you're going to get a product that you really don't like or that you can't predict how it's going to handle, and there's no way to know because we don't know who the manufacturers are, and I have a feeling that the manufacturer differs from product to product, so there's really no telling. Bad news aside though, I hope you guys found this review helpful, useful, and informative. If you did, make sure you leave me a big ol' thumbs up to let me know that I did a good job. And if you'd like to help me to continue to make this sort of content, please join me over on Patreon at patreon.com/nattosoup. If you're looking for more art supply reviews and watercolor reviews, please consider subscribing. I do a lot of that here on this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching.